All right, hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks again for the introduction, Swift. My name is Tyler Laredo, and as part of the first session of MLH Office Hours, we're going to talk a little bit about sponsorship. So here is a little outline about what we're going to cover today. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro about myself, as well as about just sponsorship in general. We're going to take a deep dive into the sponsorship process, which is really the meat of this Office Hours. We're going to give some feedback on some of the documents that you sent in over the last couple of weeks. And then we're going to dive into a Q&A session, and then we're going to finish up with a recap of what we talk about today. So to start off, I'm Tyler. I was the, I'm a sophomore at the University of Michigan studying computer science. I was the director of MHAX 6. So I've been on the MHAX team for about a year now doing sponsorship. And I worked throughout the summer, reaching out to sponsors and having them come to our fall event. And currently, I'm a representative on the MLH Community Council. So today we're going to talk about Hackathon sponsorship, but specifically, we're going to talk about the process. I'm going to first give a really quick shout out to the webinar that Swift gave about a year ago. It's really good. It goes pretty deep into everything from understanding your sponsors, finding contacts, reaching out to them, all the way up into the experience of the actual event. And the webinar that I'm doing will help provide a holistic overview on the entire process. It's really meant to be a supplement to the one that Swift did. And we're also going to look at some examples in practice. I'm also going to go over some experiences that I've gained, and we're going to look at some resources that you've sent in for feedback. So he actually has a really cool slide in his presentation. It says, "Stop me if your sponsorship process sounds like this," where you have a bunch of contacts, you send a bunch of cold emails, you sort of wait for a few weeks, and then you just expect money to roll in. And that's not necessarily how the sponsorship process really goes. I looked at this process, and it actually sort of resembles a story. I don't know if you really remember a lot of these sort of story maps from elementary school, but every story starts out with an exposition, you go through a rising action, you reach the most important part of the story, which is like a climax, you follow by a falling action, and then there's the resolution. And remarkably, sponsorship actually follows this sort of process, where you have a cold email, you send a prospectus with that, you get on the really important phone call, you then follow up with a contract or a logistics package, and then you cap it up with an invoice. So what I'm going to cover for each of these is I'm going to go into the elements of each part. So for example, I'm going to cover the structure of a cold email. I'm going to go over some pitfalls that I've seen across each of these parts. I'm going to offer some pro tips, some experiences that I've gone through. And then we're going to give some feedback on the sample documents that you've sent in. So a really quick question that I want to pose before I actually go into all this is, how do you get someone to do something? This is a really important question when you're trying to have a company come sponsor your event. And the answer is that you have to get them to want to do it. In other words, you have to arouse the sponsor in an eager want. And to sort of clarify what I mean by that, you really have to ask the question, why do companies sponsor in the first place? And Swift actually touched on this pretty extensively throughout his webinar, where companies, they have some product that they're looking to get feedback on, whether it's an API or a new technology. Basically, they want to get their this in as many hands as possible. Another one is brand recognition and exposure, and then the last one is recruiting for internships and co-op positions. And so this has actually been the marketing pitch for most hackathons. But a really important question is, why should they choose your hackathon? And a way to really sell this is through your team, your vision, your unique story, etc. So with that being said, we're going to take a deep dive into the actual sponsorship process. And we're going to start off with the cold email. So the cold email is extremely important because it gets your foot in the door. So you want to make it as effective as possible. And so I'm going to go a little bit over about what a typical email structure looked like for me and my team. So the first thing that you really want to focus on is a simple subject line. Try not to make it spammy. It's pretty basic. The second one is an eye-catching beginning sentence. Here you should really show that you know what the company does and why they should come. And for part of that, you should really show why they should come. Do some research on the company, find something unique about them, whether it's an API or a cool new internship program, and try to take that point and draft your email around that. Again, arouse them in an eager want at the very beginning. Some basic info like the number of students, the when, the where, the why, that kind of thing. Refer to the document that you'll be attaching. We're going to go over this in a little bit more detail for the next point. And then most importantly is a call to action. You'll want to ask for their availability to hop on the phone in the upcoming week. So here's some common pitfalls that I've seen from my very early cold emails, as well as cold emails that I've seen throughout the last year I've been doing this. The first biggest pitfall is templated emails. You want to make them personal. Customized emails are way more effective than any templated email. Here's where you can show the company that you know what they do and what you can offer them. We actually did templated emails at the very beginning of the sponsorship process for my team, and we actually switched over to customized emails, completely customized structure, found unique parts of each company that we sent something to, and we actually saw really big spikes in response rates after we did this transition. So while it is a lot of work in the very beginning, it does pay off in the long run. Another one is that emails can be really long. You want to keep them short. 3 to 5 sentences is a general rule. And here's a sort of a general rule of thumb is that if the email doesn't fit in the iPhone screen and you have to start scrolling, then it's too long. Another one is no call to action. An email usually won't convince companies to spend thousands of dollars on sponsorship. So you want to, you basically want to ask them to get on a call with you. Another one is reaching out too late. This is a really big pitfall that I've heard from a lot of companies. This is a common complaint that I get. Don't reach out to them 2 weeks before the event. The general rule of thumb is to reach out to them probably 2 to 3 months beforehand. All right, and then the last big pitfall is style, or second to last big pitfall is style. There are 4 general points I want to make about this. The first one is that paragraphs are bunched together. It's much easier to read if you see writing that's in chunks of few sentences. Basically, don't overwhelm them with one long paragraph. Another one is Google Docs copy and paste. This is a little nitpicky, but if you write your cold email in Google Docs and then just copy and paste it over to a compose window, you can kind of tell. So my recommendation for this is to clear the formatting after you copy and paste it from like a Word document. Another one is standard text throughout. So just the point here is to bold details. You can bold the number of hackers, location, month. Basically make the important information jump off the page to them. And then the last one is no signature. Put a signature at the end of your email, then you won't need to waste space introducing yourself at the very beginning. And then the last big pitfall that I've actually got this complaint from a bunch of companies is sending more than one email to a company. So going over someone's head. In other words, if they already told you no, stop emailing them. Don't email the CEO. Don't go over that person's head. That can really piss off the company, and they'll very likely not want to sponsor your future events. So here's some pro tips. The first one is there's really no need to be super formal, but still be polite and professional. Tech and hackathon culture is informal, so don't be afraid to throw an exclamation mark. In other words, don't make this like an English essay. However, remember to use a word check and avoid profanity. All right, this next pro tip is absolutely huge. A CRM, customer relation management software. I highly recommend this. This changed the game with MHAC sponsorship, and it allowed us to more than double the number of companies we reach out to. Some examples are Zoho, RelateIQ, and HubSpot. We really love Salesforce, it's Salesforce.IQ now. We really love these guys. Again, they change the way we operate. The nice thing about a CRM is it allows you to manage your team's emails very well. And it also helps you avoid having to have multiple teammates contact the same company. It also has some really cool tools like send later and read receipts and appointment scheduling. So next one has to do with sending emails. My recommendation is to send emails either late in the morning or early afternoon. In the very beginning when I was doing this, I'd send emails at like 8:30 so that when a company representative walks in or basically comes into the office in the morning, it'll be at the top of their inbox. And I've actually found that the way workflow works for people that do this sort of thing is they spend the first couple hours of work checking all their email and going through it. And so if your email is in that chunk of email at the very beginning when they're sifting through everything, they're very likely to miss it. So I've actually found that if you ping them late morning, early afternoon when they're in the middle of their daily workflow, they'll be more likely to open that email and actually read it. And some tools to use when sending this is Boomerang, again, Salesforce IQ has one, and Right Inbox also has one as well. And I also found that sending these early in the week is much better than like a Friday or Thursday. Another one is really remember time zones. If you're in New York and you're sending someone an email in California, just keep in mind when you're scheduling and when you actually send the emails. Another one is follow up. If they don't reply, don't worry. Usually, sometimes emails slip through the cracks, so just send them a follow-up email a week later. And then the last one is that intros are much, much, much more effective than cold emails. So if you have the ability to get an intro to someone at a company, go ahead and get it. Cool. So next we're going to take a look at some sample docs that folks sent in. We're going to cover two sample emails. The first one is from GrizzHacks, and the second one is from HackUC. So I'm going to share my screen is already shared, and we're going to take a look at the first sample doc. So Swift actually posted these documents on Facebook, and so I'm not going to just read through everything. I'm just going to offer feedback on the fly, and if you want to sort of read these afterward, then you can just watch the webinar afterward. So some pros of this is that the info is really basic. It includes everything it needs to include. It even had a hyperlink to the website before I cleared the formatting. It's also really short too. Big pros here. Some areas for improvement are that it's templated. It's really easy to see if they can just copy and paste this from company to company. And maybe that's because they have this sort of sponsored company area here. So make it customized. They could also bold some important information like the date and the number of students and location. I recommend that they use a catchier hook and again, arouse the sponsor in an eager want. Do some research, find out what they're interested in, and then tailor your cold email to that. And then if you have a prospectus, refer to it and attach it. Cool. So the next one I'm going to go over is the email from HackUC. So one, a few really big pros here is that it's very, very friendly. I felt like that, when I was reading this, like it was like a friend that was talking to me and just happened to write down the dialogue. They also provide a lot of great facts. It's very informative. And they sort of go along the route of, again, like if I'm a sponsor, they're doing their best to arouse me in an eager want, which is very evident in this. And so, this is where they say this is a great opportunity for you to blank. So they go along the area of customization. An area for improvement is that it's very, very long. It almost doesn't fit on my entire computer screen. So my recommendation is to omit the second and third paragraphs here, and maybe incorporate 1 or 2 points into the first paragraph. And also you can probably omit the area where it's, you're introducing yourself because you already have a signature at the very end. Another area where it's sort of in between is that you do have the ability to customize this with this personalized sense on the very beginning. But again, the less sort of structure you have, the more personal it comes across to the actual sponsor. Cool. So we're going to go back to this. So the next thing that we're going to take a look at is the prospectus. So the prospectus is a 1 to 2 page pricing document that advertises your event to potential sponsors. This document should illustrate what your event is, what you're trying to accomplish, and why they should sponsor and the benefits that they can receive. And very important to note that this will also be a doc that the point of contact will forward around within his or her company. So I'm going to go over some of the elements that should be included on the prospectus. For the first page, you should answer 4 key questions. The first one is, what is your hackathon? Basically answer the question, what is a hackathon? This is also a place to include the basics like date, location, the number of attendees, expected attendees, etc. Next question is to answer is, what is your hackathon about? In other words, explain the vision and your mission as well. So next question is, why sponsor? Here you can highlight some of the benefits that you're offering and how it can accomplish the sponsor's needs. And again, this is what Swift touched on in his webinar, the key reasons why they sponsor. One is getting real-time feedback on a product or API. The other one is brand recognition or change of brand perception. And then the last one is recruiting. And then the last question to answer is, why your hackathon? Explain the differentiating factors in your hackathon. Some strengths might be, revolutionary value propositions or the experience of your team. Basically, whatever they are, find your strengths and run with them. And so after you answer those questions on the first page, the second page should include a table with the overview of available packages. Include the benefits and the price points with each. I recommend a 3-tiered approach here. Reasonable, like cheap, moderate, expensive, and then I put a little star next to this one, which is co-host. The reason why I don't really count this as a tier is because only one sponsor can choose it. So almost all prospectuses that you look at will have this, but in general, stick with the reasonable, moderate, and expensive, the expensive strategy. And to sort of visualize this is sort of a sketch of what a typical prospectus looks like, where you have all the tiers across the top and then the different sections of benefits below it. You can have a different format, but this is just what I've seen among most of them. So some common pitfalls. First one is keep the documents short. I've seen some very long ones, like 4 or 5 pages. 1 to 2 pages is a very good sort of range, 2 pages max. Another one is poor style and design. My recommendation for this is to pick a font, a color scheme, a writing style, and stick with it throughout all of your documents. Whether this includes your prospectus, your logistics package, and your invoice. And this should also match sort of the general branding theme of your event, like for posters and flyers and stuff. So another one is the lack of vital information. I've actually seen this happen a lot across multiple prospectuses. Swift touched on this in his webinar. Always include the following 6 points: the name, the date, the location, the projected attendance, the website URL, and then contact information. And we'll actually take a look at a couple of prospectuses that don't have this information. So another one is strange pricing models. Here I would consider, basically, an example of this is where you have 1 to 2, for example, very low price tiers, and then, for example, the third tier is just very off, very expensive. The idea here is that you want to consider the marginal benefit and marginal value when pricing tiers. So I'm going to go over a little bit of an example. Let's say we have a $2,000 moderate or inexpensive price, an $8,000 moderate price, and then a $20,000 sort of expensive tier. The idea is that no one will jump up to the 20K tier because sponsors will look for a middle ground. In other words, you want to increase the benefits that follow an increase in price and taking into account the marginal value in each benefit. And sort of if this were to be reflected onto an actual prospectus, you'd see several benefits in the $2,000 tier, a little bit more in the $8,000 tier, and then a bunch more in the $20,000 tier. And sponsors will negotiate, so it will just result in no one will jump up to that $20,000 tier. Some benefits that are really valuable to keep in mind are opening ceremony talk, where they get to talk in front of all the attendees, a tech talk, and then post/pre-event resume access. So another pitfall is just way too many tiers. I've seen some prospectuses with like 5, 6 tiers on them. Keep it simple. I think the 3-tiered approach is probably best. Another one, this is actually really big, is not coordinating with logistics. Again, this is a reflection of what Swift mentioned in his webinar, but make sure you can under-promise and over-deliver. This is absolutely huge. Don't promise them benefits that you find out that your team just can't deliver when the event comes around. And then the last one is not knowing your value and audience. The point here is if you're a new and smaller hackathon, I recommend not looking at the prospectuses for larger, older hackathons, such as Penn Apps or Hack Illinois. If you're smaller and newer, don't charge extremely high prices. This is a complaint that I've heard from several sponsors. Now some pro tips for the prospectus. First one is sell your school's attendees. If you have a killer computer science program and your students if your school has an awesome computer science program and the students are expected to come, then definitely sell that. And then again, the last one, I just wanted to reiterate this, is breaking down the benefits into 3 main categories. General, recruiting, and branding. The sponsor, when they're looking at the prospectus, they're going to care about these 3 things. So you might as well section it off and all of your benefits into these 3 key areas. All right, so we're going to take a look at some sample docs. So we have 4 that were sent in. We have Hack the Holidays, Florida State University, Hack UC, and then VT Hacks. So I'm going to close out my presentation here. Sweet. So here's Hack the Holidays. It's pretty good. It's pretty simple, very clean, not confusing. But some areas for improvement is that I found this is a little text heavy and verbose. I would cut down on the writing and section it off into different areas. I would make the number of students, the date, and the location front and center at the very top here, along with the website and the contact information. While it does address the area why sponsor, it doesn't necessarily address the question, why hack the holidays? I see what they talk about what it is, but if you were to take out the holiday theme and the location, how would this prospectus be different from any other hackathon? Something to keep in mind. So I don't know if this was included because the school made you include it, but safeguarding, I just read through it, and if I'm a sponsor, I don't know if I really care about some of this stuff, like the ratio of children that has to be background checked at the Hack the Holidays. If what you're including on the prospectus doesn't help sell your event, then there's no need to include it. Again, I don't know if the school made you put it on there, but that's just something to keep in mind. So another one is the pricing structure is a little off. This is another example for the pricing structure for different tiers. The key here is to note that the increase in benefits should follow the increase in price. So here's what we got. And again, taking into account the marginal value in each benefit. So here, the increase in price is from 300 to 700 pounds. So 400 pounds, and that's a 133% increase in price. But I've also noticed that there are only 3 extra benefits that are added. So a 40% increase in price. And I know that the opening ceremony talk is probably one of the most important benefits and extremely valuable. But my question for you, and you might have an answer to this, is does this still validate 133% increase in price? That's just something to keep in mind. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about for the second jump in tiers is from 700 to 1,000. So this is a 43% increase in price. And I saw a 27% increase in benefits. So another 3 benefits were added. And some of that were added were pre-event access to resumes, the workshop. Those are both extremely valuable. And so my recommendation here is to maybe bump up Giga a little bit more. And I think you can make a little more money off of that tier. Basically, the lesson here is to note that the increase in benefits should follow an increase in price. Again, taking into account the marginal value in each benefit. All right, so the next prospectus that we're going to take a look at is FSU. This is actually pretty nice. The design is pretty attractive. They have a great color scheme. And they also mentioned some really good differentiating factors here. Some areas for improvement is maybe to move the 3rd page, which just explains some of the benefits that a sponsor would get, over to the 2nd page. before they see sort of like the benefits and context with the tiers. I recommend putting the website and email. So here's the website, an email. I recommend putting that at the very top where the rest of the information is included. So this is actually not something I mentioned earlier in the presentation, but push notifications. Put a limit on this, just trust me. Otherwise, you'll probably be sending out, more than 100 push notifications and blow up everyone's phone. This actually happened at MHAX where I put it on the prospectus and everyone got pissed at me because it was on there. And I think the total was like 110 push notifications in a weekend, and people were not very happy about that. So please put a limit on this. And then maybe the last sort of area for improvement would be to maybe better organize the first page. A sponsor isn't really going to have time to read all the text. And so here I recommend breaking it up into sections instead of a letter format so that their eyes can jump to certain spots on the page. Again, sort of like addressing the questions, why your vision, or what is your vision, why sponsor, why FSU, that sort of thing. Cool. So the next one we're going to take a look at is Hack UC. So this is a high school hackathon. I would look through it. It's 3 pages long. Some areas for improvement would be to shorten this section where it says Hack UC, or what is Hack UC. I know it's a lot of information, but if you shorten it to like one short paragraph, I think that will suffice. Basically, make it concise. In the why should I sponsor section, I would move the benefits that they care about most to the top of the list. The reason for this is that people care about most about the thing that they're measured on. So this includes sort of the number of impressions, like branding, the number of exposures to their technology, and then the number of people that they recruit. And I recognize that might be a little bit different for a high school hackathon, but just in general. So for example, like I think throwing received product feedback up to the top, recruiting high school talent up to the top, evangelize your products to the top, and then throwing something like help spread the literacy in computer science to the bottom of the list. That's just my recommendation. Another one is I recommend scrapping the 3rd page. A lot of this stuff you can really just talk about on the call. So next one has to do with, the next set of recommendations has to do with the pricing. I'm not really sure what I understand about the less than $500 thing here. I recommend just keeping it at a static sort of level instead of throwing some like sort of obscure notation here. For pricing, I would also recommend rounding it to the thousandth place. So if I'm a sponsor, I'm going to want to just negotiate this $1,250 down to $1,000. Same thing goes with the platinum tier as well. And I also recommend including a $sign here and potentially lessening the number of tiers. Again, I recommend just a 3-tiered approach here. I'd also recommend throwing a minimum bid for the co-host, and the reason for the co-host spot, and the reason for this is so that when the company looks at this, or a potential sponsor looks at this, they have a sense of value on what that's worth. And that can be really important for when you get on the call later. And then I also recommend breaking up the benefits to general, recruiting, and branding. Again, this goes back to the pro tip that I mentioned earlier. All right, and the last one that we're going to take a look at is VT hacks. So they actually mention a really good differentiating factor here. They mentioned that their hackers were ranked number 6th for the spring season, for MLH spring season of 2015. So that's really good. I recommend keeping, having a factor like that on the page. Some areas for improvement though would be that it's actually missing the number of hackers, the date, really any information about the event at all. It lacks really any key details, and those are details that you really need to have on this so that when you're actually talking to the company, they understand sort of relatively when it's going to be and who's going to be there. It's also missing some sections with the overall benefits that companies can receive, as well as why they should sign on with VT Hacks. Again, sort of addressing why sponsor, and then why VT Hacks. And then the last one, also the last area for recommendation is ties into the last prospectus that we looked at, which is sectioning off the benefits into 3 categories: general, recruiting, and then branding. Cool. So those were the 4 prospectuses that we looked at. Give me 1 second. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the phone call. So the phone call is one of the most important part of the sponsor. It's the most important part of the sponsorship process. This is where the company puts a name to a voice, where you explore their wants and needs, and where almost all of the negotiation takes place. It's also a really great place to avoid misunderstandings. So the purpose is to better inform the sponsor about the premise of your event, sort of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Second one is, this is the reason why it's the most important part of the process, and that is to discover their success metrics and goals. Why are they doing this? And then using that information, then you'll be able to determine an appropriate package for that company. So I'm gonna go over a little bit of a basic phone call structure that me and my team used throughout fundraising for MHAC 6. So before the call, 2 really important things. Check out the company first. You should have already done this before you sent in your cold email, but just make sure you have up-to-date current facts about the company and don't go on blind about what they are and what they sell. The second one is to pull up a note stock to write things down. If you're doing this on the way to class, I recommend not doing that, because you want to write down some important things that they mention on the call. So on the call, there are 6 key sort of points that I'll make. And again, this is just a general structure for how almost all these cold calls that I did. Obviously, your phone calls can go a little bit differently. This is just sort of a general sort of summary of what I've seen throughout doing this. The first thing is always say, like, thanks again for taking the time to hop on the phone today. It can be a little paralyzing at first if this is your first time doing this, so it's a great place to start. Ask them if they've heard about your hackathon before. And then depending on how much they know, then give them some basic information about the event. It might be a good idea to have a list of bullets in front of you on your note stock that you can use when describing your event. And here you can also sell them on your team and your story. So like, what makes you special? The next part is the most important part of this call. This is where you ask them what they're looking to get out of sponsoring the event. This really does influence the rest of the call. So let them do the talking and write down what they say. This is what your note stock is for. That way you can refer to it later. And remember, this is a really, really key point, is the only way to influence people and sell a product is to arouse them in an eager want and talk in terms of what they want. This is why this part of the call is so, so important. So after that, you know, the thing that they mentioned, that why they would want to come, you can say something like, that being said, have you happened to take a look at the sponsorship prospectus that you sent in your cold email? This is like nearly impossible to script, and it's really contingent on what they say they're looking to get out of the event. So you can ask them if they have any questions about the prospectus, if there's a tier that jumps off the page to them. And this is also the area where you can really negotiate. You can play around with your tiers and try to consolidate a package that best suits their needs. After that, you can say any more questions. Always ask if there's any lingering questions that they have. And the last one is thank them for taking the time to hop on the phone and mention that you'll follow up. And depending on whether or not they actually commit to a deal on the phone, you can mention that you'll send a logistics package the next day. Again, the reason why I went over this phone call structure is because at first it might be a little paralyzing. You know, what do I say to a sponsor if I've never talked to them before? And hopefully this structure will be a guide for how you can conduct your future phone calls. Eventually it'll get easier after a while. So some common pitfalls that I've seen. First one is just talking way too much. You know, there's really nothing to elaborate on this. Let them do the talking. This is the most common pitfall that I've seen and what I've heard from other companies, is failing to recognize what the sponsor wants. For example, don't try to sell them on a package that emphasizes resumes if they're not into recruiting. Don't try to sell them on, an API expo if they don't have an API. Basically, take what they tell you, what they're interested in, and cater your package around that. And this is another one that I've actually heard from a company recently when it comes to pitfalls from other hackathons, is people saying this: I don't understand why you're sponsoring us at this level when your competitor is coming in at a higher level. The lesson here is don't pit companies against each other verbally. You really don't know anything about their budget or their circumstances, and saying something like this might piss them off. So some pro tips for the call. Practice, practice, practice. I absolutely sucked at phone calls at first, like horrendous. Trust me, the more you do it, the easier and smoother this gets, and it ends up becoming really fun after a long time. This is something that Swift actually mentioned in his webinar. Don't be afraid to ask their budget. You can say something along the lines of, given the times you've sponsored events similar to this one, what have you spent and what did you get? You'll find that sponsors actually appreciate this. And this also gives you a reference point for how you can customize a specific package to suit their needs. Another one is negotiation. This is a very good thing. If you have a team that's doing sponsorship, I recommend that you have a list of bottom lines that you and your team will stick with and have them negotiate from there. For example, like this tier can only be offered at this price point or something like that. And speaking of which, don't have a strict adherence to tiers. They really should be a general guide for negotiation, and then you can, again, customize these packages to suit the company's needs. All right, and the last one is actually kind of cool, is smile when you talk. When I first got on, when I started to do this, a little bit more, I realized that if you just have a big smile when you hop on the phone with them, you come across as much more cheerful and much friendlier. This is kind of a weird thing to say. You might not think about it at first, but trust me, it really does come a long way after a while. Cool, so we're reaching sort of the falling action in the sponsorship story, which is the logistics package. The purpose of the logistics package is to provide a clear, or what exactly is it? It's a document that provides clear expectations and benefits before the sponsor commits several $1,000s to sponsorship. In other words, it's sort of like a contract. Companies really appreciate something like this, and it shows a sense of professionalism. And also, if disagreements arise at the event over what benefits they get, then you can refer to this document at the event. And actually, this saved our butt a few times. I remember back at MLH 6, during opening ceremony, we had a company that came up to us and said, hey, when can we go on stage to present our API? And they didn't get that benefit when they signed on. And so I had to explain that to the sponsor. And they eventually got pissed off, and so they looked at the logistics package and realized that it was not included. So this is actually something that will help sort of alleviate or avoid conflicts down the road. So what actually goes into a logistics package? There are 4 really basic things. The first one is a summary, where you mention the company's goals and why your offerings are a good fit. This can be pretty short. The next one is a list of each of your benefits and sort of the details behind each benefit. So for an example, if you list table space, give dimensions for the table, something as basic as that. Or if you talk about opening ceremony talk, mention that you have like AV equipment. That sort of basic thing. Basically provide, outline the expectations that for each of the benefits that they're getting. Mention the value of the package, so what they're paying for. And then number 4 is a list of deadlines and actionables. And here you would include information like payment deadline, deadlines for them submitting their logo for t-shirt orders, and then deadlines for when the sponsor should ship swag to the event. Because usually sponsors like to ship swag ahead of time. So those are some things you can include on there. So there are 3 general pro tips. One of them is just keep it short. My rule of thumb here is between maybe 2 and 6 pages. It doesn't need to be like a 20-page document. Make sure the style and design match what you have on the prospectus, as well as just the rest of the promotional materials for your event. And then the last one is to make it visual. There's some pictures in there. Again, you're still, even though you sort of have the sponsor almost locked down, still throw pictures in there to make them have a sense of what they're actually getting. Awesome. So now we're reaching the last part of this sponsorship story, which is the invoice. A thing to note here is that the invoice is really contingent on how your hackathon handles finances. So whether or not finances are handled through your university, or if the hackathon is a nonprofit or LLC, it all depends. That all influences how you actually craft your invoice. So an invoice should include 6 or 7 key things. The first one is just the name, the billing address, and email for your hackathon. That way they have something, a location that they can ship their check to. The sponsor name, billing address, and email address. A custom invoice number. This actually bit us in the butt a couple of times. You can throw an invoice number like 0001 or something like that. We actually had our invoice rejected from multiple companies because we forgot to include invoice numbers, so throw those in there. Another one is an area for purchase order numbers. Again, this depends on the sponsor. Basically, if it's a large company, they usually have a PO number. You can leave a space for this. You can always just throw it on the invoice after they give it to you. Of course, the list of the benefits that they're getting, so basically an outline of their package, the total price for that package, so what they're paying you, the due date, so when the invoice is due, and then if your hackathon accepts ACH electronic transfer or credit card, this is a great place to throw information about how they can pay with those methods. So a couple of things to note is if you just search in Google Images invoice templates, you'll find like a bunch of templates that you can just use or style yours off of. It's pretty simple. And then customize the invoice to match your branding package. Again, logistics package, prospectus, and the invoice should all have a similar style. So that finishes up the entire sort of sponsorship story arc. The next thing we're going to move on to is Q&A. So I'm going to pass it on to Swift to forward some questions that we got throughout the webinar.
Cool. Thanks, Tyler. Really appreciate that. So our first question comes from Adam McNeil. He asks, for small first-time hackathons, how do we figure out what our selling point is? For example, how can I answer the question, why Grizz Hacks?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would, again, look for, this is a common sort of problem that a lot of smaller, newer hackathons are encountering. And some of it could just be, the devotion of your team. I guess how much, for example, we have the team working all hands on deck for 50 people throughout the summer working on this or something like that. You could also, if your school has a killer computer science department or you have the support of some faculty, you can mention that too. Or if you have a really cool new vision that you want to launch, and your hackathon is the first one doing that. Those are all great sort of starting points for having these differentiating factors.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Diana Chang. She asks, how many sponsors should we aim for with our sponsorship tiers? Like, how should we decide how many sponsors are going to take each of the packages we offer?
That's a really, really good question. So it depends on the size of your event. I'd want to say, actually, this really is specific to each hackathon. So I would say maybe for a hackathon of maybe 500 people, if you can, actually for any size hackathon, I'd say maybe, if you can shoot between 30 and 50% for your sort of moderate tier, another 30, 40% for your bronze tier, and then the rest be gold, I think that would be solid. Of course, plus or minus some percent, but that's my general rule of thumb.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Ben Thornton. He asks, what kind of size team should the sponsorship team consist of in terms of splitting the outreach across 5 or 6 people versus 1 to 2 people? All
right, I really like this question because actually I dealt with this throughout the summer, and the current director of MHACS also is working on this now. So typically before MHACS 6, the sponsorship team was around 3 people max, and that's a lot of work. I recommend having that's a lot of work for 3 people. I recommend maybe having 3 to 4 people, 5 max, which would include the director of sponsorship. I would not do any more than that because that's just a lot of people to manage. I think 4 or 5 is a really good number. And again, that would include the sponsorship director or the person in charge of fundraising.
This next one comes from Mihak Vij. He asks, how do we get sponsors to notice us in our emails? And I'll add some context on that too. Sponsors are obviously receiving a lot of email every day. Like, how do you get them to open up your email in particular?
Yeah, so this comes down to 2 things. Have a very simple hook. I would not have a spammy looking hook. A simple subject line. An example of a subject line that was actually spammy that didn't really work for us is one of my teammates over the summer sent out an email with the subject line MHACS 6 opportunities await. And that sounds kind of spammy. That sounds like something you'd get off a massive listserv. So try to keep it unique. And again, the way you can really make sure that these companies open their emails is by customizing it and almost treat it like you're writing it to the company or the person itself, not just something you copy and paste from contact to contact. This is, again, where customized emails really do go a long, long way.
Awesome. The next question comes from Tim Fogarty, our global commissioner over at Major League Hacking. He asks, Tyler, what's better, small companies that are local or bigger companies like a Google or a Facebook when you're deciding who you're going to do outreach to?
It's a great question. I think it depends on the type of hackathon and a combination of both. If you're a smaller hackathon and a newer hackathon, this actually goes back to one of the questions that was asked earlier, is how do you get a company to notice you? Reaching out to local companies is a great way to get some initial sponsorship dollars in the door if you're a new and rising hackathon. If you're a hackathon that's been doing this for a number of years, or you're on your maybe 4th or 5th iteration, then you can start contacting larger companies and find some success with those. I think having a mix between the two, a healthy mix between the two is good. But again, if you're new, reaching out to smaller local companies is probably the way to go.
Awesome. This next question comes from Ethan Lee. He asks, for a first time or high school event, what are the major advantages we should be listing for sponsors? Obviously, high school events don't have the same recruiting advantages as collegiate hackathons.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, I've sort of noticed this with the theme of sort of beginning hackers. And so this actually comes down to selling the value proposition that if an engineer sort of guides younger beginning hackers through a problem or through a process, then the student will look up to that company. And so for example, let's say the company goes to a hackathon with all high schoolers, and the engineer at that company is mentoring the student or helping the student solve a problem. And the engineer keeps persisting with that student to make sure that the problem gets solved. Eventually, over time, throughout the hackathon, the student that's getting help will really look up to that engineer and will really have a positive sort of perception of the company. And that is really powerful down the road, maybe in 2-3 years when the company might recruit that student. Basically, it's sort of brand perception. I think that's a really key benefit that high school hackathons can target.
Awesome. This next question comes from Jordan Kaplan. He asks, do you have any companies that you would personally recommend reaching out to for either sponsorship, partnership, or general assistance? And I'll add some extra on that. I'll say, if you don't have specific examples, maybe you could list off some types of companies that people should be thinking about reaching out to and what the different types are?
Yeah, so I think actually, Swift, you touched on this in your webinar. There are some larger companies, larger tech companies. There are some VC firms that can bring companies with you, or companies with them. There are also some companies that might not offer like technical benefits, like like local food companies, or some other, I guess, some other software companies as well. But I think those are actually, I don't entirely remember what you mentioned, Swift, but you have food, VC firms, tech companies, etc.
Great. And this is our last question, and then we'll let you wrap things up. And this one also comes from Adam McNeil. He asks, if you're contacting a small local company via cold email and aren't sure what they'd most look for in a hackathon, recruiting, branding, etc., how do you cover all the possibilities in your email?
I think really it's simple. You can just probably mention all of them. But again, I think my recommendation is to do some research on the company. Look, and this covers everything from like news about the company. If you find that they had something like an IPO this past year, then you can congratulate them on that. Look at their company blog. If they're launching a new API, and again, this is for the local company. If they're doing some sort of philanthropic event, or if they're launching a new API, or they're hiring or something like that. Usually, almost every company, you can just scroll through their news feed, scroll through their blog, and find something unique about them. And get an idea about what they're interested in. And then using that, then you can tailor a cold email to that. But if you were to address all three, I think you can simply mention all three.
Great. Just so if anybody on the stream had a question that they didn't have a chance to ask, you can always feel free to email those in to hi@mlh.io, or you can reach out to Tyler directly. Also, for those of you who sent in sponsorship docs, that we didn't get a chance to give you feedback on the air, we'll be collecting some feedback and sending it off to you after the webinar is over. With that, I'll pass it back to Tyler to close things out.
Awesome, thanks, Swift. Cool. So we're gonna do a little bit of a recap on everything that we covered today. So the first thing, again, I mentioned this at the very beginning, is I highly recommend watching Swift's deep dive into sponsorship webinar. The webinar that I'm doing is meant to supplement his and provide some real world examples surrounding the points that he makes. Also, again, this is a huge thing to really keep in mind when starting the sponsorship process, is to arouse the sponsor in an eager want and sort of play with their interests. The only way to get someone to want to do something or sell a product is to get them to want to actually do that and actually buy that product. We covered sort of the typical story arc for what the sponsorship process looks like, from cold email to prospectus to the phone call as a climax, the logistics package or contract, and then invoice. And again, this is something that, just an honest point I want to make, is that out in the wild, you're really building on the experience of others. The sponsorship process is a huge learning process, and you're always iterating, and everyone's always getting better. So I encourage everyone to share their experiences. If you find a cool new technique or a cool tool, that you think other people can benefit from, then share it. And whether it's in a blog post or a Facebook post or even a video like this, I highly encourage everyone to just share their experiences with the world. So here's, again, Swift mentioned that if you have any other questions that we didn't address, we'll get back to them. And we'll also, offer feedback on some of the prospectuses that we did not cover in today's webinar. If you want to reach out for me with questions, here's my Facebook URL. Just send me a message on Facebook Messenger and I'll get back to it. So again, my name is Tyler Laredo. I was the sponsorship director for MHAX, and thanks again for watching. Have a good night.